One of the very easiest things that you can do to design for real life is ask yourself, if my design were human, would it do or say this thing that I'm doing or writing? Literally envision it as a physical action or as a spoken interaction, as a conversation between you and someone else. This has its basis actually in a blog post that Kate Kiefer-Lee of MailChimp wrote a while back. And her tip was simply to read all of your content out loud. As Kate says, she reads everything that she publishes out loud and often finds things that need to be changed. So when you're reading content, if it sounds stilted or if it sounds unnatural, that's a sign that it needs to be rewritten. And this is also a really great way to find typos. Kate makes 3 points in this post, 3 ways that this approach helps. The first is to catch errors. When you're reading text, you're a lot more likely to spot misspellings, typos, that sort of thing, as well as weirdness in grammar, mismatches of verb tense, repeated words, talking about forms and I wrote froms, that sort of thing. It also improves the flow of the text because one of the things is that the way that we write and the way that we speak are very different. And that's not to say that when you write, it should have all kinds of ums and uhs and pauses and other sort of verbal tics in it. Mostly, I think, because we learn to write formally, more formally in school. We have to write papers. And we don't really learn to write the way that we speak. I mean, writers who write the way that they speak are often acclaimed for that skill. So to have the text and to read it out loud, it helps improve that flow. And it also softens your sentences. Again, with that formality, sometimes there's a little bit of a harsh edge to the way that we write. And by reading it aloud, you can get a better sense of how it's going to come across to somebody who's reading it and soften that up a little bit. Hearing someone else really helps. Kate says that using a text-to-speech tool, something like VoiceOver on the Mac or any other text-to-speech sort of tool is really useful because you can hear it. And actually, with text-to-speech getting as good as it is, that can sometimes be a decent substitute if you're working solo, you work from home, that kind of thing. If you don't have other people sitting next to you, at a desk next to you, then you can make use of those sorts of tools. But even just having you read it out loud to the wall, to a stuffed animal or an action figure, or in my case, I have a monkey lamp in my office. I can read to the monkey and see if it sounds normal, if it sounds like something a human would say. But this general idea of effectively anthropomorphizing what you do for your own design purposes is really useful. Imagining interactions as well as copy can be very useful. A good example of this is Facebook's Year in Review. A Year in Review is a yearly feature that Facebook has where they invite their users to look at posts and pictures from their past year and compile them into a sort of a photo album, although it can be a video album as well. But anyway, share that with other people in the timeline. And in 2014, Facebook did this thing where they put an ad in people's timelines if they hadn't done Year in Review. So if you hadn't, for whatever reason, done Year in Review, you hadn't been on Facebook, or you had not done a Year in Review because you didn't want to, or you hadn't found the time, Facebook created this call to action that they put into timelines that basically said, hey, check this out. Please try the Year in Review feature. But if we imagine this as a personal interaction, as a physical interaction, this is essentially like coming up to somebody and without even asking, just kind of shoving a picture in their face and saying, hey, look at this. Or, hey, I do albums. We should do one right now. Check it out. And the question is, would a real person actually do that? Or would they do something different, like asking first, like saying, hey, I have this picture that you took and I thought it was interesting. Would you like to see it? Or, I do photo albums for friends. Would you like to do one? And I can show you what that looks like if you'd like me to. So this that we're seeing here is a reconstructed picture of my Facebook timeline on Christmas Eve day in 2014. The girl in the middle of that little clip art party there is my middle daughter, Rebecca, who had died 6 months earlier on her 6th birthday of aggressive brain cancer. So 2014 had not been a good year for me. And I had intentionally avoided Year in Review, knowing what kind of year I'd had and knowing that I didn't want to relive it, at least not on Facebook. But here it was anyway, just shoved into my timeline without any warning or any obvious way to make it stop. And how we got to this place is really completely understandable. If you think about it from a design perspective, Facebook had a product that they were understandably proud of, right? Year in Review was really very enjoyable for many, many of their users. And in order to encourage that, they looked for the post, the picture that had gotten the most quote unquote engagement from the year, the most comments, the most reactions at that point, the most likes, because that was really the only response metric there was. And so how they got here is understandable, but this call to action was absolutely unrequested and unwanted. And honestly, in my situation, it was rather painful and off-putting. I was able, after the initial shock and immediate grief sort of ebbed, I was able to think to myself, okay, how did we get here? How did we get to this place of Facebook showing me this picture and in this context? And if you think about someone who had a great year and wants to share it, Year in Review was actually perfectly designed. And not just Year in Review, but this call to action were exquisitely targeted at that use case. But there were many people who had a very different situation, who had not had a good year. And when you think about how many people were using Facebook at that point, it was about 1.2 billion monthly active users. It's more than that now. But at the time, if even 1% of that 1.2 billion people had had a horrible year, how many millions of people is that who got a timeline ad or something shown to them that they really had been trying to avoid? For a lot of people, that may have been the last straw. That may have been the point at which they walked away from Facebook forever. And from Facebook's point of view, that's not good, right? And from a designer's point of view, that's not good. That's the last thing that we want, is to actually cause people so much distress with our work that they walk away from it completely, and they walk away from our clients or ourselves, whoever that is. This is not what we're after. And what we're after is to help people, to encourage them to do things, but to do so in a way that's respectful of the user and does its best to take into account the kind of situation they might be in. And so that's what this whole series is really about, is figuring out how we can avoid these sorts of unfortunate moments.